Is there any circumstance under which chronic pain can itself be a compensable disability?
Yes, there's a famous case on that from the Federal Circuit, the Saunders case. And what the court said there was, as long as chronic pain itself limits your ability to function, is disabling in some fashion, then chronic pain without a further diagnosis is a compensable condition.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Attorney Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA, your guide to unlocking your VA disability benefits. If you're a veteran applying for disability benefits, subscribe to our podcast for the latest developments in VA disability. So welcome, I'm Francis Jackson. This is Kristian Terison, and we're from the law firm of Jackson and MacNichol, where we specialize in getting veterans justice on their VA claims. So what's this all about? Well, today we're going to talk about chronic pain. And who is this for? Well, obviously it's for veterans, but it's also for a larger group. It's for those who are related to veterans or friends with veterans, folks who want to support veterans in their community. So we are just here trying to get the word out on how this all works and what needs to be done in order for veterans to get justice on their claims. And without carrying on anymore, let's get to today's episode.
All right. As you mentioned, we're discussing chronic pain today, and not the chronic pain of carrying on with a claim through the Veterans Administration, but chronic pain in terms of, what so many of our clients experience. Now, is there any circumstance under which chronic pain can itself be a compensable disability?
Yes. There's a famous case on that from the Federal Circuit, the Saunders case. And what the court said there was, as long as chronic pain itself limits your ability to function, is disabling in some fashion, then chronic pain without a further diagnosis is a compensable condition.
Okay. And so how is that rated?
Well, that gets interesting. It's rated as the VA does with anything else that doesn't have a specific listing in 38 CFR 4.25 where all the conditions and their ratings are listed. What the VA does with those, including chronic pain, is to rate by what they call analogy, meaning they try to find the condition that is closest in terms of its effect on the human body to the condition that they're analogizing to, here chronic pain, and then use those ratings as a guide to rating the condition that doesn't have a specific listing in the table.
Okay, so would something like, complex regional pain syndrome fall under that umbrella?
It would. What the VA would try to do is to look at kind of what's most like that. So for example, they might, depending on where in the body it manifests itself, they might rate it by comparison to damage to the sciatic nerve, if it was a complex regional pain in the leg, for example. Or they might, depending again on where it is, rate it by analogy to the back conditions. They would try to figure out what's within the rating table that is closest to what's going on here.
Gotcha. And so what types of evidence are most important for veterans who are trying to pursue that type of claim?
Well, there are really two separate or overlapping kinds of evidence. The first is just evidence about the chronic pain, the veteran's own testimony about it, or testimony or statements from a spouse children, grandchildren, other relatives, friends, anyone that sees the veteran on a consistent, ongoing basis and can comment on the fact that he talks about and acts like a person who is in pain a lot of the time, and can comment on the severity of the apparent pain or the apparent severity of the pain. So that's one part. The other part is the medical part. Obviously, if there's actually a formal diagnosis of complex regional pain syndrome, then the medical evidence of that will be important. But more typically, what you have is just an area or multiple areas of the body where there is chronic pain, and the doctor would confirm that the veteran has reported that pain consistently for a period of years, explained what the symptoms are. The doctor has had a chance to see how it limits the veteran. He doesn't walk well, or doesn't lift well, or can't sit for long, or whatever it may be, but can report the apparent impact of the pain. Obviously, we can't measure other people's pain. Pain is a subjective response within the nervous system, and there's no way to quantify and measure it, but we can report that we see things that are consistent with chronic pain. Person grimaces or winces or moves in an unusual way, or moves slowly, or limps, or whatever it may be, and the doctor can verify those things.
Okay. And how would a veteran handle like a compensation and pension examination if they, were scheduled for one after claiming a chronic pain condition? Because I know the C&P doctors, they tend to be let's say, a skeptical lot.
Yeah. I think all a veteran can do is honestly describe to the doctor where the pain is and how severe it is and how frequent it is. As long as the veteran does that, I think he's done what can be done. Obviously, you can gild the lily a bit by having the spouse come along and talk about the pain and talk about how it interferes with the other spouse's activities. And you can do the same thing with other children, neighbors, friends, whatever. There are lots of opportunities there, but I think, having the veteran say where the pain is experienced and describe as best he or she can how severe it is, and talk about the frequency and duration and what it interferes with. Once you get those facts out there for the examiner, there's not really a lot more to be done.
And, you mentioned earlier, pain is subjective. It also, is not going to show up on an X-ray or an MRI. Is there any requirement for diagnostic testing if you're pursuing a claim for pain disorder?
No, there isn't. Typically what will happen, as you can imagine, is that there will be some diagnostic testing in an attempt to diagnose what's causing the pain. For example, you might have X-rays or MRIs or, CAT scans or whatever particular test the medical professional who's delving into the issue may think will best reveal what the condition is. But there is nothing specifically for pain.
And how about for veterans who have, say a physical service-connected condition that gives rise to a chronic pain? Is there any process by which they could get compensation for the pain?
Well, really, in that setting, the examiner is supposed to look at things like limitation of movement from pain and flare-ups where it's particularly painful, and how those things impact the veteran, and translate that into the percentage ratings that the VA looks at in its rating schedule. So just to give you an example, say that I've got a problem with my right knee, and I explain to the doctor that 3 or 4 times a month I'll have a flare-up and the right knee will be so bad that I literally can't walk on it. The pain is too much for me to bear weight on. And that'll put me down for a day or two until it clears up. What the doctor is supposed to do with that information is to do his best to translate that into a limitation on range of motion, because that's how the VA goes about rating most of these severe physical limitations with limbs and joints and so on. And it's less than perfect, let me tell you. Pain and its limitation on activities really doesn't translate all that well into range of motion measurements. But that's what the doctor is supposed to attempt to do, is to try to express it in terms of an additional limitation on the range of motion.
And so if there was a veteran who, because of a service-connected physical condition, progressed into full-blown complex regional pain syndrome, something like that, with its own separate diagnosis, could that be claimed as a condition separately?
Oh, sure, it could. In most instances, the VA is probably going to try to treat that as an outgrowth of some underlying injury and rate it in that context. But in answer to your question, it is theoretically possible that they could try to rate it independently.
Yeah, and it would just have to be a particularly severe, extraordinary case.
Yep.
Something that goes beyond the joints or body systems implicated in whatever condition is already service-connected.
That's correct.
Okay. And I know I've seen this sadly with a number of our clients where there is chronic pain that progresses to mental health problems because, experiencing that kind of pain day in and day out can wear anybody down, and, it's not uncommon to lead to a formal diagnosis of, in particular, depression.
That can happen. In fact, there's some really, I think, kind of scary medical research out there that shows that chronic pain can actually cause your brain to shrink. You lose brain function suffering from intense chronic pain over time. I find very scary. But regardless of that, the point is that yes, chronic pain can have significant effects on your mental health. And typically, as you mentioned, it's most likely to be in the form of depression. And that depression can be, number one, rated as a secondary service connection condition and given a separate rating and payment.
Okay. What are some of the common reasons that chronic pain claims end up getting denied or get a lowball rating?
Well, I think the most common one really is just that the VA raters can't see it. My experience with the VA over the last, 30, 40 years now, has been that the VA does well with conditions that they can see. So if you come in with a broken leg, they can see the x-rays, they can see the cast, they can see the screws that were put in the plates on the x-ray, and they know you've got a broken leg. And if you can explain to them how it's service connected, they can rate that. They understand that, they can see it, they can rate it. Conversely, with conditions that they can't see and that you can't show on an objective test, it's much, much more difficult for them to figure out, A, is this condition real or is this person just kind of telling me a story? And B, okay, assuming it's real and I'm convinced of that, how in the world do I rate this thing that I can't see and measure? And that, seems to me to be the big challenge with chronic pain. It's just difficult. It's kind of like, you have these folks who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the Humvee is going along and gets blown up by one of these roadside improvised explosive devices. And the guy in the passenger seat in the front gets half his foot blown off. The VA can see that. They can rate it. He's probably not going to have a problem getting his benefits. The guy who's sitting in the left side in the back, who gets bounced all around and whacks his head all over the inside of the vehicle and has a traumatic brain injury, much harder for the VA to figure that out. They can't see it, and it becomes hard for them to understand it and appreciate the severity and rate it effectively. And I think it's the same with chronic pain and with the depression that comes from chronic pain. It's just difficult for them to, first, understand that it exists, and second, even if they're convinced that it exists, to properly rate it.
Now, I know, for instance, in like Social Security disability, they're often updating listings related to chronic pain as different, medical specialist groups publish different diagnostic guidelines, things like that. Have there been, or do you anticipate any changes in how the VA handles chronic pain?
I don't remember any specific ones. I don't think there are any. The VA has recently updated its mental health listings, and what they do is they have a process where they go through and they periodically look at each of the body systems that they have these rating codes for and try to sort of bring them into line with the current medicine. I have to say that's not always, doesn't always seem to work very well, but regardless, they do have a process for it, they do it, and I would think that eventually there will be some specific listing for chronic pain, but at this point they really, as I mentioned earlier, try to rate it by analogy to whatever they think is the closest condition.
It sounds like the Saunders case was sort of the solution, and that's good enough. What are some of the key ways an attorney can help when a veteran is trying to pursue a chronic pain claim?
Well, attorneys can do lots of things, but the primary thing that attorneys do is gather and organize and analyze information. And in chronic pain cases, I think the role of the attorney is like that in any other kind of disability case, to gather the information, first the information showing that the condition exists, and certainly in a chronic pain case, I would start by contacting the doctor who's treating the veteran for the pain, which may not always be the primary care doctor. It may be a specialist, it may be a neurologist. You can't tell. It depends on kind of what started the pain. Might be an orthopedist. It's hard to tell. Anyway, start with that doctor. Get a statement from her or from him explaining what complaints have been made, what they've observed, what they think about the chronic pain. Depending on how powerful that statement is, if it's not particularly powerful, I would certainly want to get statements from family members saying, oh yeah, I've seen Grandpa limping. It's pretty obvious he's got pain in his right leg. He sometimes has to use a cane or a walker or whatever it is, or maybe he has to use it all the time. And, gather up as much information to establish the presence of relatively severe pain to begin with. Second thing you want to do is talk about how it limits the person. If it's a leg and the pain is frequent and severe and keeps the veteran from being able to walk very far, or if it's in the right leg and it keeps him from driving an automobile, obviously you want to gather up that evidence, get signed statements, get it all in before the VA, that sort of thing.
All right. Well, we're out of time for today, but thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of Victory Over the VA. Please be sure to subscribe and join us again next week.
Thank you all for watching, and we hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.